Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. Kion's Legacy, Part 2. Just like him. Flashback. Okay. Who am I? Kiara asked. Roar! Hey, Mikavisa, she mocked, imitating Kion. She was playing charades with the Lion Guard and her friends, Zuri and Tifu. Everyone was on their back, laughing hysterically. Except Kion. Kiara, Kion exclaimed, you're not supposed to talk. Oh, Kion, Zuri said, you're just mad because Kiara is making fun of you. Kion scoffed. You're Kion, Tifu called, after she finally gained control of her laughter. Yes, Kiara said with a giggle. My turn, Bunga yelled. Everyone stopped laughing. Ooh, he cried. It is time. Come, Simba, so I can hit you with my stick, Bunga said, swinging an imaginary stick around the air. This sent the group into laughing fits again. You're Rafiki, Fully called, but Bunga didn't stop. He kept ooh-ah-ahing and jumping around like a monkey. Third person view. Kiara heard. Kiara? She groaned. Hey, Mom, she heard Kion say. Kiara woke up with a start. Her amber-colored eyes searched the rock platform, her face full of hope. But she didn't see Kion. Instead, she saw her friend Savannah and Savannah's daughter, Kito. They were staring at her. Her face fell as her eyes landed on Kito. She was sure she'd heard Kion, but it was just her brother's cub. Hi, Kito, she said dully. Hello, Aunt Kiara, Kito said, her face showing her confusion. Kito's point of view. That was weird, I thought. What do you need, Kito? Mom asked me. I just came to get away from an angry Asha, I replied. My mom said in understanding. She pulled me over to her and licked my head. We smiled. I shook the Savannah dust off my pelt, and I gently sat down beside her. Then my aunt cleared her throat. Hey, Kito, my Aunt Kiara breathed. Her voice sounded shaky, and her eyes were glassy. Could you come here? I hummed. I'll be at the watering hole, my mother said. Oh, okay, I said slowly. My aunt nodded her head slightly. Oh, great, I thought. My aunt acts weird, calls me over, and my mother just leaves. Fantastic. I sighed. But I knew my mother wasn't one for drama, and this talk would most likely involve tears. My mother never stopped to cry over things. Even when my father left, she stayed strong and got over it. We watched her leave us. She slowly walked down the ramp and slowly disappeared into the golden grasses. Aunt Kiara and I just sat there for a while. I was a little uncomfortable, but mostly curious. I finally said, Aunt Kiara, did you need something? She smiled sadly and sighed. You look so much like your father, she said. She was right. I did indeed look like my father. My fur was the color of yellow butterscotch. My eyes were caramel brown, and I had light brown spots on the back of my legs. My tail tuft was a bright red, and I acted a lot like my dad. But it was weird that was all she wanted to say. She sighed deeply and her body shook slightly. Are you all right? I asked her. This was not normal behavior for a new queen. There were tears of pain in her usually kind, joyous eyes. She swallowed hard. Yeah, well, not really, she said. Then she bit her tongue, holding back tears. It's just... She cleared her throat and looked away, trying to hide the tears that slid down her buttermilk-colored muzzle. I sighed. I knew what the problem was, but I didn't know how to help her. I thought about how I helped myself when I had her problem. But the more I thought, the more I realized I didn't get over it. "It's my father, isn't it?" I asked quietly. She nodded, tears still steadily streaming down her face. "Oh, Aunt Kiara," I breathed. It was then that I let out the hot tears I was trying to hold back. I walked over to her and lifted her head with my paw. I brought her eyes to my level. I smiled and I nuzzled into her soft forehead. "Also," she sniffed, "I've noticed you've been struggling as well." I stepped back, blinking, and blinked hard. "Yeah," I muttered. "Come here," she said softly. I walked over to her side and laid down. I snuggled up to her supple pelt and cried. After the hot sun, my morning full of endless playing, and now crying, I was exhausted. As I cried, I became more and more fatigued, and eventually fell into a light sleep. I had slept for about 45 minutes when I was nudged awake. I slowly opened my tired eyes to see my aunt still by my side. She was gently nudging me with her snout. I shook my head, trying to wake myself up more. I groaned and stretched. "What is it, Aunt Kiara?" "I just had a great idea," she whispered, aware that I had just woken up and was trying to be quiet. "Oh?" I asked. "Yep," she exclaimed. "I was trying to figure out ways to relieve you from your pain, and then I thought about the lion guard." I sighed, thinking my aunt was just having another one of her childish dreams. "Aunt Kiara, there is no lion guard anymore," I moaned, resting my drowsy head back on my paws. I lazily shut my eyes. "Oh, kiddo, you know what I mean," she exclaimed, losing her soft, soothing voice into a loud, excited one. "Your father's lion guard." "All right, what about them?" I asked, losing my patience. "Well, I thought maybe if you visited them, then you could, I don't know, maybe you could talk about your father. Maybe figure out how they cope with it. That could help you," she said, almost yelling. I winced because she was practically screaming in my ear. I sighed. She was lucky she was the queen and my aunt. Otherwise, I'd be screaming at her, telling her to quiet down. "Well, kiddo, what do you think?" she asked, standing up and almost jumping around. I rolled my eyes. My aunt got way too excited when she had any ideas. I slowly rose into a sitting position. "Oh, Aunt Kiara," I started, "I really don't know." She cocked her head and furrowed her brow. "I just need to think about it," I said. "I'm sorry, I just don't know about seeing them again, especially not to talk about my father." I bit my tongue hard. "I've cried enough," I told myself. "I understand," she breathed, looking at the ground. I put my ears back, ashamed I had hurt her. "I'm sorry," I breathed. She lifted her head and smiled. "It's all right, kiddo. I really do understand. It was a long shot. I just really wanted to help you," she said, smiling. I rushed over to her and we rubbed heads. "Thanks for understanding. Hakuna Matata," she replied with a sweet smile from both her eyes and her mouth. We shared a moment of happy silence. Then we heard loud panting. I glanced over to the ramp leading up to the rock platform. Tina, Asha, Amira, and Koda were huffing and puffing their way up the ramp. When they reached us, they all collapsed at our feet. "You guys look beat," my aunt said as she walked over to her previous laying spot. She laid down, facing the group of cubs. "We are," Asha said, smiling. She walked over to her mother and nuzzled her into her pelt. She then turned her gaze on me and gave me a look that cut through me like a dagger. I cocked my head at her with a hurt look on my face. "Well, take a break from Take a break from your hard playing, Kiara said, chuckling. Don't worry, Tina assured his aunt. We will. He stretched out, then collapsed in the welcoming shade next to her. Then he shot an ugly look my way. Now that hurt. I didn't understand why they all decided to hate me at once. I looked at Mira, and she gave me the same look. But then when I glanced Koda's way, he looked ashamed, like he was betraying me. I was so hurt and confused. I wanted to scream and holler. I wanted to ask them what I did, but instead I kept myself together and calmly excused myself. I gotta go, I mumbled to Kiara. She smiled. Sometimes she was so unobservant. I sighed and jumped off, trotting into the grasses, then used my sneaking skills to sneak away from Pride Rock. I just wandered around the Pride Lands, heading nowhere specifically. As I walked, I thought about the day. What did I do wrong? How could I have hurt them? I thought and thought until my brain hurt, but nothing came to me. I can think of nothing, I thought. I was walking about to go hit my head against a rock. Then I stopped. I looked up to see a rock wall, with green vines covering part of the wall. When my mind didn't know where to go, my heart took over. And my heart definitely took over here. After all this time, I lamented, why here? I slowly walked into the vines. I put my paw on the rock wall and slowly dragged the vines, revealing a dark passageway. I sighed. My paws dragged along the rock floor, bringing up dust and dirt that had collected over the long period of time. Vines had overgrown the entire room. It was dark and gloomy. But this isn't how I remembered it, and sometimes memories trumped sight. I still saw the faint glow from the skylight and the sparkle on the water. I sighed. It is sad, isn't it? I heard someone say. I gasped and turned around. No need to worry, the voice said. A mandrill came out of the darkness. He held a tall stick with fruits hanging from the top. It is just me, he said with a cough. I sighed in relief. Rafiki, I whispered. I didn't greet him, and he didn't greet me. The wise mandrill was getting quite old, but even though he was old, he understood what everyone needed, no matter how young or old they were. Rafiki was a close friend of my entire family, so no greeting was required. We looked around the cave. I sighed. I looked Rafiki in the eyes. He coughed again. We didn't talk, just thought. I slowly walked over to the wall. I pushed back a curtain of vines to reveal old drawings. On the wall were drawings of lions in groups of 5. But there was one at eye level. It was different. I sighed. Instead of one lion with 4 under it, there were 5 animals in a line. A hippo, an egret, a cheetah, a lion, and a honey badger. I smiled. Here, Rafiki said. He came to stand next to me. He reached out his stick and tapped the painting. It came to life. The hippo moved up to the middle. The lion moved up to the middle. The hippo came up behind him. The egret flew to the top of the hippo's head, and the honey badger and cheetah each took a side of the lion. Wow, I nodded. Rafiki used to show me this picture all the time and make it come to life. The picture was of my dad and his lion guard. This cave was the lion guard's lair. I walked over to a rock overlooking the lair. This was the spot with red paint on the floor. It was from when I found one of Rafiki's fruits filled with fresh paint. I decided I wanted to paint like Rafiki. The memories here were endless. Everywhere I looked, I saw a familiar rock or scratch. Rafiki sighed. I turned to face him. He coughed again. Go, he said simply. I cocked my head. Go, see them, he said, pointing at the drawing. I looked at the guard. A smile slowly spread across my face. I nodded. I think I narrowed my eyes at the painting. I think I will. I turned around to thank him, but he was already gone. Thanks, I sighed anyways. I took one last look around. Then I darted out of the cave, not looking back. Time skip. I neared a grassy area of the savannah. There was no sign of any animals anywhere. That's what I get for trusting birds, I said, as I looked around where a bird had given me directions to come. Everywhere I looked, there was grass. Grass and, you guessed it, more grass. I sighed. This was going to be harder than I thought. I searched the plains for any animal who could possibly point me in the right direction. But there was nobody. Then all of a sudden my feet slipped out from under me and I was rolled forcefully on my back. Ouch! Hey! I crawled. Dirt was all over me and the sun blared in my face. Out of the grass had jumped a feline figure. It had jumped me and its paws pinned me to the ground. I squirmed. All I could see was a silhouette, the sun blazing behind its head. The cat growled. Who are you? I asked. What do you want? I could ask you the same, she growled, pushing on my shoulders harder. I gasped. No, it couldn't be this easy. Could it? Fully? I stuttered. She raised her head. I could see her face now. How do you know my name? She growled. It is you, I said. How do you know my name? She growled again, even louder, pushing my shoulders down still harder. Ow! I cried. It's me, Kito. Ouch! She narrowed her eyes and studied me. Her yellow spotted fur was a pattern I hadn't seen in a long time. On her forehead was a spot in the shape of a heart. While she took her sweet time looking me over very carefully, the heat was intense, and her dainty paws pushed my aching shoulders deeper into the dirt. It was beginning to become too much. Finally, she released some of the pressure and smiled. Oh, Kitsu, she backed off me. I'm so sorry. It's all right, I said, slowly getting up. My shoulders and back were aching, and I opened my mouth and started panting violently. I cracked my neck. I sighed. You look hot. Do you want to come to my den with me? She asked. The smile on her face was bright. Well, I was definitely hot, and I would welcome any amount of shade. But even though I wanted it, all I could manage was a nod. Okay, well, this way, she chirped. Huli slowly started off. She seemed relaxed, like dragging our feet over the dry, dusty ground with this blazing ball of fire pouring its almost unbearable heat over our sore-tired backs was no more than a pleasurable stroll. I was about to pass out from the heat and walking when we stopped at a large hole in the ground that served as Huli's den. I walked in and collapsed, panting like a maniac. It was just then that I noticed a litter of cheetah cubs sleeping soundly at the other end of the den. I looked at the cubs, then at Fuli. Isn't he cute? She asked softly as she padded across the den and laid next to the cub. His name is Dora. She smiled, obviously very proud of her son. He is adorable, I smiled, still lying down, panting between words. She snuggled up next to the sweet cub. He raised his head and sneezed. Fuli smiled a genuinely wide smile. She chuckled, then raised her head and looked at me. So, Kitsu, it's been a long time. You really have grown up, she said. I looked at the ground, embarrassed. You also look just like your father. The resemblance is amazing, she exclaimed. And I imagine if I hang around you, you'll act just like him too. I smiled and raised my eyes to stare into her eyes. Her pear-green eyes sparkled with joy and pleasure, and smiled almost as much as her mouth. Well, obviously you didn't come here to talk about how much you're like Your father, she chuckled. No, ma'am, I said. Well, what did you come here for? She asked, a smile on her face. Well, my aunt, Kiara, suggested I come and visit. Then Rafiki told me to come when I was at the lair. I said, You were at the lair? She asked. I smiled and nodded. So, is there something Queen Kiara said? She asked. I smiled. She told me to figure out how everyone coped with my father's disappearance. Oh, she said. I sighed. So, Fuli, how did you cope with my father's disappearance? I asked. Well, as you probably know, I'm a lot like your mother. So I imagine I coped with it the same way your mother did. She explained. Did you state the facts to keep yourself emotionless until you were alone, then calmly talk to the great kings of the past about it? I asked her. She nodded. She slowly nodded. Then you're right. You did cope with it like my mother did. I told her. Then there you have it, she said. We chatted for a while longer before I left the mother and cub to silently nap in their den. When I left, I aimlessly wandered around the Pride Lands, thinking about how much Fuli had changed, about the way she coped, and wondering when I would see her again. I was staring into the evening clouds when I heard someone approach me. I took my eyes off the fluffy clouds to see a lioness walk up to me. I smiled. Why, hello, Tina, I said as she walked over. Good evening, Kito. Bettina replied. Bettina was the sister of King Kovu and the mother to my best friend, Tina. Tina's father had died before Tina was born, so I never knew him. But Tani insisted us cubs call her by her nickname, Tani. What brings you out here? I inquired. Well, your mother told me to keep an eye out for you, and I had nothing better to do, so I went searching, she explained. I nodded my head. So, what are you doing out here? She asked. Well, I was talking to Fuli, I said. Vitani scoffed. I looked at her. I was surprised. Vitani didn't usually do rude things like that. Well, let's go home, she suggested. I agreed and trailed behind her.